It's a group of English ghost hunters. It's on the Travel Channel. They spent a night there and a lot happened when they were there, and you can look that up on YouTube if you search for Most Haunted New London Ledge Lighthouse. And they had stuff like where one of the guys in the group was whistling and it sounded like something was imitating the whistle from somewhere else, and they swore there was none of them were there, you know. So a lot of odd things. I got to be part of an investigation in July 2006, and I was with a group called New England Ghost Project. Let me tell you who, there's better pictures of some of these people coming up, but the man here, who you don't see well in these pictures, but is Ron Kolek, who started New England Ghost Project a number of years ago, and he has done hundreds of investigations, and he's written a couple of books on paranormal subjects, and also has 3 or 4 radio shows, internet radio and regular radio shows on the paranormal. So he's pretty well known in the field. And he's also, by the way, just as a little side note, he's now the chairman of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses, and we'll talk more about that group a little later. But anyway, so, and the woman with her back to us here and facing us down here is Maureen Wood, and she is the official resident psychic medium of New England Ghost Project. And again, I'm an open-minded skeptic. I was pretty skeptical of the idea of mediums when I got involved in this kind of stuff. But I'll tell you that I've seen Maureen in action a number of times now, and I have absolutely no doubt that she is 100% sincere. She's not acting. If she's acting, she's better than Meryl Streep, I'll tell you that. And she is what's called a trance medium. If you saw the movie Ghost, the Whoopi Goldberg character was a trance medium, and the idea of that is that the spirits will actually speak through the person. So Maureen sometimes will start speaking as if she's somebody else. And I'm going to actually play you a video clip of our investigation there. Our investigation at New London Ledge Light was recorded for a TV show for a series called American Builder. I don't believe it's on the air anymore, but it was on for several years. The Comcast company produced it. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. It was on every day for years on the Comcast's own channel. It was on at like 5 o'clock every day or something. And it was usually like a home improvement kind of show, but they decided to do a Halloween special at this haunted lighthouse. So they had a TV crew sent out with us, and also this guy, Jimmy, who was one of the hosts of the show, was this big burly construction worker. So he came out to kind of host the show out there at the lighthouse. And by the way, this other woman on the left over here, and her back of her head over here, is Karen Mossy, who at the time was the EVP expert of New England Ghost Project. And I'll hold that thought and get back to EVPs, explain what that is in a few minutes. But it was an interesting night. And fairly early in the night, they were playing with this Ouija board. And they don't usually use a Ouija board for investigations, but they did it that night because, number one, it was being shot for TV, and they thought this would be something very visual for TV, and also something that Jimmy, the host, could take part in. So they brought out this Ouija board, and I'm going to play you a clip that happened while they were playing with that. And basically, you're going to see Maureen Wood in action. And hopefully you'll be able to hear this okay. So let me just go ahead and play this and I'll comment on it.
You want us to leave? That would be a big yes.
We have no way to get out of here, so we have to stay. Who are you?
It's almost kind of like a warning.
A warning?
Yeah, like
Who is here with us?
Is there anyone?
Yeah.
Why are we here?
Yeah.
Do you like us here?
Do I interfere? Please leave. Please leave. No.
You know you were dead. It's time for you to go.
Someone else here.
Someone else here.
Angry.
Oh, man. Oh, we got a new visitor. Who is here with us now?
You lie. 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 So angry. They left me
Where?
outside. Top of
Are you on the roof of the lighthouse?
Yeah.
Are you on the roof?
Let down. Let down.
They left you up on the roof of the lighthouse? You alright? She's fine. Alright? No. What's the matter? Push him up, Maureen. Maureen, push him out. Push him up, Maureen. Cut the film. Cut the film.
It was an interesting night. Sometimes taking part in these investigations is a little bit like seeing a live version of The Exorcist. And first, let me just say that, I know Maureen personally. She's just a regular soccer mom most of the time. She claims to be fifth-generation psychic. Her daughter also seems to have some abilities. It's not something she asked for, it's just something she's always had since she was a kid. And I'm going to kind of cut to the chase here, but I could go on and on about Maureen and what she does. But here's a picture early in the morning with Ron and Maureen, obviously looking very tired. We never did get any sleep that night. We were picked up early in the morning by boat to go back to shore. We tried to go to sleep by, maybe 5 in the morning or something, and there was no furniture, so we had to lie down on the floor in different rooms, and I went into one room, and it was starting to get light out, and I could see spiders everywhere in the room. So I didn't get any sleep at all. But anyway, you can see how exhausted they are. Maureen reached some interesting conclusions based on what she experienced there. And you saw her, you saw her holding her head and yelling, "You lie," and all that kind of stuff. She felt pain in her head. That's part of how she reached her conclusion. She felt that there's a very angry male spirit there, and that he was not a lighthouse keeper. She feels that this spirit, this guy who's still there, was actually a construction worker who was working on the lighthouse at one point, possibly even involved in the building of it when it was first built, and that his co-workers locked him out on the roof as a prank. And she feels that he was struggling to get back in and slipped and fell to his death. And she says he's very angry, number one, because the co-workers covered up his death, they covered up what had happened, and number two, everybody thinks it was a lighthouse keeper who died. Everybody's got the story wrong, so this spirit is extremely angry about the whole thing. Now, we don't have any proof that anything like that ever happened. We also have no proof that a lighthouse keeper ever died out there. You would think that if a lighthouse keeper committed suicide in the 1930s or died by accident or whatever it was, there'd be some sort of record of it. Nobody's ever produced a newspaper clipping or anything else about that, which leads me to believe that it's not true. We have no record of a keeper named Ernie. We have no record of what Maureen said either, but it's actually, to me, more believable. I'm not saying it did happen, but it's an interesting alternate story, and actually seems more likely to me than a lighthouse keeper story. So it was an interesting night, for sure. Before I move on to another lighthouse, I want to play you a couple of sounds that were recorded that night. Anybody who watches the paranormal TV shows has heard of EVPs before. It stands for electronic voice phenomenon, or phenomena. And the basic idea is that a paranormal researcher will use, usually these days we use a little digital recorder, it might look something like this. And sometimes they'll just record for a long period of time, or sometimes they'll ask questions in the recorder. Like, for instance, you're going to hear Karen Mossy say, "Are you here, yes or no," in this recording. And the idea of an EVP is that nothing is heard audibly at the time the recording is made. The voice is only heard later when it's played back. And I don't know the explanation for this. There's different opinions on any kind of scientific explanation. But I've heard some very compelling EVPs. And, I've been there sometimes and they've been played back live, so I know the person didn't have time to go fake it or something. So, there's a lot of them are very compelling. And they seem to be in response to questions a lot of the time. So I'm going to play you one here that was recorded during this investigation, middle of the night, by Karen Mossy, who was the EVP expert for New England Ghost Project. And you're going to hear her say, "Are you here, yes or no?" And you'll hear something else right after that.
Are you here? Yes or no?
So that, what sounds like a quick yes, was not heard audibly at the time. Again, it's only heard when it was played back later. This one was recorded outside on the deck that same night by Karen. She was near the stairs here in an area where another researcher had once gotten an interesting picture of kind of a fog in the air that she claimed was paranormal. I'm not convinced it was. I think it may have been somebody's breath in front of the camera, which is a common thing that's mistaken for paranormal stuff. But anyway, Karen was outside by the stairs, and she feels, you're going to hear this strange raspy voice, and she feels this voice is saying, "Help me, I'm cold." Some people believe there was a sailboat wreck near the lighthouse, and a lot of the strange things have been attributed to that as well. I should mention that. And before I play this, speaking of what I was just saying, a guy who was involved, the New London Ledge Lighthouse Foundation, part of the American Lighthouse Foundation, takes care of this lighthouse. There's a guy who was a longtime member of that organization who was in the basement by himself one day, and he swore to me that as he was working in the basement, he heard a woman clear her throat. It was like it was right in his ear. He was like there was a woman right behind him, and he turned around, nobody was there. He knows that's what he heard. He's sure it wasn't his imagination. But anyway, so I'm going to play this, and it sounds, Karen feels it's a voice saying, "Help me, I'm cold." There's different classes of EVPs, and a class A would be something that where everybody hears the same thing. There's no mistaking what it's saying. Then there's B, C, and D. That one's fairly clear. It's probably maybe a class B, I would say, but it's probably open to interpretation. And this one, again in the middle of the night, this you're going to hear Ron Kolek's voice say, "Do you like us here?" and followed by something else.
You like us here?
It's kind of like a whispery yes. And again, none of these heard audibly, only heard in playback later. All right, I'm going to play some more EVPs at another lighthouse later, but I'm going to move on to Rose Island Light in Newport, Rhode Island here. And this is one of the lighthouses where you can stay overnight. And you get the bonus that it's haunted as well. So, but besides that, it's very beautiful. And it's out in off the harbor in Newport, near the Newport Bridge. It was actually discontinued in the late 1960s when the Newport Bridge was built because it's almost under the bridge, and it was abandoned for many years, but the Rose Island Lighthouse Foundation was formed to restore it. They've done a wonderful job there. They've actually had a lot of work done on the building this year. And it now has a replica Fresnel lens, just as a little side thing for lighthouse buffs. They don't make those beautiful old glass lenses anymore, the multiple prisms, but there's a company in Florida that makes acrylic replicas. They bought an acrylic replica of a fourth order Fresnel lens for $60,000. It's now in use in the lighthouse. It's the first one in New England I know of to have something like that, so it's just kind of a neat thing. But anyway, you can stay overnight here. They have the upstairs, the second floor here is a modern apartment. You can stay there for a week. I forget how much it costs. It's well over $1,000 in summer. And not only do you pay for it, but they give you chores to do. They call you the keeper for the week. You got to mow the lawn. You got to take weather readings. You got to check the water level in the cistern in the basement, and on and on. But people absolutely love it. It's just such a beautiful place, and they enjoy being the keeper for the week. I've been there on the island twice when families were leaving after being there a week, and people were in tears because they didn't want to leave. That's how much they loved it. On the first floor is more like a museum. But there's 2 bedrooms where you can stay overnight if you just want to stay for a night or two. So you can either stay upstairs or downstairs. And the current director of the Rose Island Lighthouse Foundation is a man named Dave McCurdy. And I've got to know him, and he feels very strongly that the place is haunted. He and his wife have been there overnight where they've heard footsteps on the stairs and doors opening and closing, and he has no doubt that the place is haunted. And he feels that it's a particular suspect that I'll tell you about in a minute. But we went out to do an investigation, New England Ghost Project, about 2 years ago now, and I'm right here, Ron Kolek over here. The guy with the dark glasses here is Tom D'Agostino, and if anybody reads books about haunted places, he's written a whole bunch of books on haunted New England, quite a few, so it was neat having a paranormal author with us there as well. I'll tell you a little bit about what happened that night, but first I want to tell you, Dave McCurdy, for different reasons, feels that this guy, Charles Curtis, a longtime keeper, is possibly haunting the place. It's a common theme that a lot of these lighthouse ghost stories, people think that it's a keeper. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. This guy was there for over 30 years, and that's a fairly typical kind of story. You know, if you believe, you know, I know that some of this it's a kind of a jump to believe any of it for some of you, I'm sure, but if you believe that in some cases these hauntings, whatever you want to call them, are spirits that are tied emotionally to a place and have trouble leaving even after death, it makes a lot of sense to me that a lighthouse keeper would fall into that category. They were so emotionally attached to these places that it makes perfect sense to me that they would have trouble leaving, or maybe would actually choose to come back and visit later on. Charles Curtis was there for over 30 years, starting in the 1880s. He was really a fixture there. His grandson, a guy named Wanton Chase, grew up with him, with his grandfather, and Wanton Chase just died a few years ago. I think he was 97, and he actually helped them restore the house to look like it did when he was a kid, so he had a lot to do with the restoration of the place. And I'm going to show you an interesting picture here. This is a painting that's hanging in the living room of the the keeper's house and lighthouse are all one building here. The tower's on the house. So this is on the first floor of the house, and this painting is hanging there. Somebody took this picture a couple of years ago with a flash, obviously. You see the flash bouncing off here. It's got glass over it. The interesting part of this is down here. And the guy who took this picture swore that there was nobody behind him. There was nothing behind him. There wasn't much of anything behind him. I think mostly blank wall. And also this looks nothing like the guy who took the picture. But I'm going to show you a cropped close-up of that part of the image here on the left. And there's Keeper Charles Curtis on the right. So that's that part of the picture that, you know, doesn't really fit in with the flash. It's hard to tell where it's coming from. Dave McCurdy, the director, feels that this person actually captured an image of Keeper Charles Curtis. I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm not sure I 100% buy into that. It almost looks like Edgar Allan Poe, doesn't it? I think it does anyway. But another interesting thing about this is a lot of times when there are pictures that are supposed to be ghost images or, you know, spirits, a lot of times they have sunken eyes or look like they have no eyes, and that's the case with this. It sort of looks like him, but the hairline is different. I don't know. You can draw your own conclusions. One thing I'll say about this kind of thing is that there's definitely a human tendency to want to make sense out of images and sounds. So, you know, people see Elvis in a potato chip or whatever it might be. You know, I think we want to make sense out of chaos when we look at some of these things. And the same is true of some of these sounds. So, you know, it might be wishful thinking to an extent, but it's certainly an interesting picture. Before I move on, I just want to say the most interesting part of our investigation at Rose Island was a couple of episodes of table tilting or table tipping. I don't know if anybody has any idea what I'm talking about. This goes back to the days of spiritualism in the 19th century. People would sit around a table and put their fingertips on the table, and somebody would say, if there are any spirits here, please show us that you're here by moving the table. We did this on the first floor there with a small wooden table with three of us, Ron Kolek and Dave McCurdy, the director, and myself. And we put our fingertips on it, and I know that nobody's legs were touching it. Basically, after a few minutes, it was vibrating. You could feel like a fine vibration on the table, and after a few more minutes, that table was dancing around. You don't have to believe me, but I was there. I saw it. Later, we were upstairs in the kitchen. There was a big, heavy wooden table. 6 of us sat around that table, and we all had our doubts that it was going to do anything because it was so big and heavy. Everybody put their fingertips on it. Ron Kolek said, if there are any spirits here, as long as you mean us no harm, please let us know you're here by moving the table. And the same thing, I swear, within a few minutes, it was like, you feel like a fine vibration, and then it was boom, 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 boom. That big table was dancing. Again, you don't have to believe me. I don't expect you to believe me, but I experienced it, and I was sure there were times when half the people were taking their hands off the table and it was still moving around. To me, there's 2 possible explanations for that. One, or maybe some combination, but one, spirits were actually helping us move the table, or our own subconscious minds were doing it. Isn't that interesting if that's the case? But I know that our legs were touching it and our fingertips were just barely touching it. That big table was dancing around, so it was pretty interesting. So moving on, this is another lighthouse near Rhode Island, but it's in Fall River, Mass. And it's a caisson light, meaning the bottom part, the cast iron bottom part is sunk down into the bottom, and then the cast iron lighthouse up here is built on top of that. This lighthouse was badly damaged in the hurricane of 1938. We just passed the 75th anniversary of that hurricane a couple weeks ago. And it has a tilt. It has a permanent tilt now. I think it tilts a little bit to the left in this picture. And they built this bigger caisson around the bottom after the hurricane to protect it in case of more big storms. The keepers lived inside this tower. This is an example of an offshore lighthouse where the keepers actually lived inside the tower. There was never a separate house. And this is one of the lighthouses that the government was trying to give away a few years ago. No organization applied for ownership of it. So they auctioned it. That's what they do. If they don't get any good applicants for these lighthouses, they're auctioned to the high bidder. And I don't want to get into my personal feelings about the auction process, but in this case, they were very lucky that they got a really good private owner, the guy who was the high bidder on this lighthouse. And this is him. His name is Nick Korstad. He's about 32 now, I think. And he's from Oregon. And when he bought this lighthouse, he actually moved from Oregon to Fall River to restore and take care of his lighthouse. And he's actually, he lived for a few months inside the lighthouse. He's got an apartment nearby now. But he has done wonders out there. And Lighthouse historically did not have a red stripe, by the way. He added it. He thought it would look better with a red stripe. Usually people aren't allowed to do things like that, to change the appearance if it's still an aid to navigation, which it is. But he asked the Coast Guard, and they said, sure, do what you want. We don't care. It's not really an important aid to navigation anymore, so go ahead, put a stripe on it, go crazy. And it does look nice, actually, and it calls more attention to it. He has done a lot of restoration out there with the help of family and friends, and all the furnishings he's put in there, he got at Goodwill, all the furnishings and decorations. So he saved money that way, and you know, he's done a very nice economical restoration. But the reason I'm talking about this lighthouse tonight is that he feels the place is very haunted. I had never heard about this before, but he says since he's been involved there, he's had all kinds of experiences. His brother, who helped him a lot there, will not go back there again because he feels the place is so haunted. He's actually afraid to go back in again. Supposedly a lot of people, including Nick, have heard voices. And there's two things that apparently that are most common. One is, sounds like an old man whistling a tune over and over again. And number two, a little girl's voice. And Nick said that he's heard this little girl laughing and talking on different occasions. And one time Nick was out like on the deck of the lighthouse painting during the day, and as he was doing that, he heard, it sounded like the little girl's voice was right in his ear. He swore it was right there. And she said, "Those colors are cute." And of course there was nobody there. Well, if you go to his website, Borden Flats, I think it's bordenflats.com, he's got a number of pictures he's taken. I didn't mention, I should have finished the thought when I was talking about the restoration. He now has it open for overnight stays. So you can stay there, and if you look up his website, you can see the rates and everything. It may be about over for the season, but pretty neat place to stay. You've got to climb off a boat and up a ladder on the side, but it's not too difficult. But he's taken a lot of interesting pictures out there. These are two of the pictures that are on his website. And what he finds interesting about this is that he took these pictures within seconds of each other, back to back. It's the top of the stairs just below the lantern, the ladder that goes up into the lantern where the light is. And on the left here, there's nothing of interest in this area, but the picture taken seconds later, there's this dark area here, and he said there's nobody else there, nothing that would have caused a shadow there. So he thought that was of great interest. It's just, you know, very odd that that dark area would be there. I've shown these pictures before, and just recently somebody was saying, what about the orbs in the picture? There's something here, and maybe some other weird, and this streak of white here is interesting. I'm not sure what that is. It might be paint on the floor, I'm not sure. But as far as orbs go, a lot of times people will say these circles, as they call orbs in a lot of pictures, there's some kind of paranormal manifestation. I'm not a big believer in that. I think they're usually, if not always, the result of dust or moisture. There may be some that are of interest, but I don't think this is anything special. But anyway, Nick feels very strongly the place is haunted. So we went out as a group about a year and a half ago, New England Ghost Project, just a small group this time. Here's Nick and Ron Kolek of New England Ghost Project. This woman in the red sweatshirt is Leslie Marden, who is another medium. In fact, she's again had these powers, or whatever you want to call it, since she was a little girl. Didn't ask for it. She's not a trance medium where she speaks as if she's somebody else, but she just has very interesting intuition and, you know, things that she feels about these places. She wrote a book, by the way, about her life as a medium called Medium Rare. a great title. The other woman here, Karen Ruck, is another member of New England Ghost Project who calls herself sensitive but not a psychic, but I've seen her come up with some really interesting observations. Both Karen and Leslie, early in the evening during this investigation, drew a picture of a man's face with like a captain's head on it, a big mustache. But neither of them did any research at all. They didn't want to know anything about the place. They didn't want me to tell them anything. Both drew this guy. They felt strongly that he was there. Leslie said early in the night, she said, I'm thinking of somebody's name. I'm thinking like the French name, Jean-Paul. She was saying Jean-Paul. And I said, do you want me to tell you? She said, no, tell me later. Don't tell me anything. Later, I finally told them, and I had the history of the lighthouse in my pocket, and I showed them that there was a longtime keeper named John Paul. Not Jean-Paul, but J-O-H-N, last name Paul, John Paul. And he looked like the guy they had drawn. So that was pretty interesting. And late at night, these pictures were taken in darkness with a flash, so it's almost in total darkness. Ron here is using a form of dowsing, using a pendulum, asking yes or no questions with a pendulum, which is an old form of, you know, he uses modern equipment a lot of the time, but he also uses some of the old methods. So he's asking yes or no questions with a pendulum, you know, if yes is a clockwise circle, no is counterclockwise, whatever. And he gets interesting results doing that sometimes. Karen is asking yes or no questions using dowsing rods here. L-rods, as they're called, and you can do the same sort of thing. So, anyway, so as they were doing this in almost darkness here, we're all in this one room in the second level of the lighthouse, and we all thought we heard footsteps above us. Nobody was up there. It sounded like boom, 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 like somebody was walking around above us. So Nick and I stayed on this level, but the other three went upstairs to investigate. And while they were up there, Nick and I were sitting on the floor, and there was a gadget on the floor that Ron had set up there. It's called a shack hack, I believe. And it's basically a radio transmitter that receives stations, but it doesn't stop at any one station. So it keeps cycling through all the stations on the dial. And researchers use it, and they'll say that sometimes it'll answer your questions. I'm not necessarily a big believer in it. Anyway, that was running on the floor. Nick said, a few minutes after they had gone upstairs, Nick said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "What?" He said, "A light just shot across the floor." And seconds out, I didn't see it, but he said a light just shot over that way. Like, it didn't seem to be coming from anywhere. And just seconds after he said that, the direction where he said the light went to, there was a bang, like bang, just like something hit the wall or something, but there was nothing there. So that was interesting. And seconds after that, the shack hack thing, the radio receiver, said the words very clearly, "Protect your home." And that was the only clear thing we heard it say the whole night, and it happened seconds after that other stuff happened. So that was all pretty interesting. A few minutes later, Ron and Karen and Leslie came down from upstairs, and all three of them said that while they were up there, they very distinctly heard a man groaning upstairs. I think that's what a ghost's supposed to do, right? But they heard this like, oh, you know, this man groaning as if he was in pain or something upstairs, and they looked around and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. But they were very, very serious about it. They all heard it, and they couldn't figure out its origin. So it was an interesting night. This lighthouse is in Mid-Coast, Maine, and has been called the most haunted lighthouse in America. Owl's Head Lighthouse, if anybody knows that area, it's near Rockland in the town of Owl's Head, at the entrance to Rockland Harbor. It's a very short little brick lighthouse at the top of a high bluff, lights about 100 feet above the water. And you can see how there's the keeper's house is down here, and there's a walkway and then stairs going up to the lighthouse. This is just an example of a keeper. I'm not saying he haunts the place or anything, but the guy's name is George Woodward. He was there in the 40s. This is one of those places where a lot of the things that happen seem to point to the idea of that it's a keeper haunting the place. But there's no legend or story that's usually told to explain who it is. But I have talked to so many people who lived at the keeper's house here who feel the place is haunted. I've actually talked to probably at least 6 or 7 different sets of people who almost everybody who's lived in that house that I've talked to feels it's haunted. There was one couple who lived there who didn't experience anything, even though the wife really wanted to. She was into ghost stuff, and she really wanted to, but nothing happened to her. But everybody else feels it's haunted. This picture was taken in 1988. This is Malcolm Rouse here, who was the last Coast Guard keeper of that light. It was automated in 1988. He left. Believe it or not, this is me in 1988, just a couple of pounds ago. And I went to interview him. I interviewed him on video, and he was the first person to tell me that the place was haunted. He said that his wife had seen, on more than one occasion, had seen a female apparition inside the house. And he's one of many people who've told me about this common phenomenon where they go outside after a snowfall, and they'll see footprints in the snow going up the walkway and stairs. They seem like they don't come from anywhere. They don't come across the yard or anything. You'll see them on the stairs and walkway and ending at the door of the lighthouse, which doesn't seem to make any sense. They didn't go anywhere from there. And sometimes those will even appear in heavy dew, not just snow. So he was the first one to tell me it was haunted. As I said, he left there in 1988. After he left, the Coast Guard kept the house to use as housing. So for quite a few years it was used as Coast Guard housing. Now it's the headquarters of the American Lighthouse Foundation. I'm waiting for new stories from the people who are working there now. But anyway, going back before Mac Rouse, I talked once to a guy named John Norton, who was the Coast Guard keeper there circa 1980. He told me, and this guy's a big, gruff Mainer, it looks like one of the, what's that TV show with the guys with the beards? Duck Dynasty, thank you. It looks like he's off that show. He's got this big black beard. And he told me that one night he was by himself up in his bedroom, and he says he knows he wasn't sleeping or dreaming. He knows he saw this. He saw an old man's face in the air in the room looking at him. He absolutely knows that's what he saw. Later in the 80s, there was a couple named German, G-E-R-M-A-N-N, Andy German and his wife. One night, they're going to bed. Andy realized he had to go outside to take care of something before they went to bed, so he left his wife in the bedroom. While he was outside, his wife swore that she saw in the bed next to her the indentation of like somebody was moving around in the bed next to her, where her husband had been, but wasn't at that moment. That's, to me, pretty creepy to see that. It's like something out of a horror movie. And later, her husband told her that when he had left the room, right after leaving the room, he saw what he describes like a gray figure go through the wall into the bedroom. Now, why he didn't tell her about that right away, I'm not sure, but the timing of it seemed to correspond, where he saw that figure go into the bedroom and she saw the movement in the bed. So when they were going to leave, around mid-1980s, the next family to come in there was the Grahams here. This is Gerard Graham and his wife Debbie and their little daughter Claire. And the Germans told them the place was haunted. And they said, especially this one bedroom upstairs, they said, don't use that bedroom. It's the most haunted part of the house. They laughed, they thought it was a big joke. So they made that their 3-year-old daughter Claire's bedroom. The entire time they lived there, Claire had an imaginary friend that she described as an old sea captain. And I believe she still, obviously she's an adult now and she still remembers that. And one of the most interesting things that happened was one night, the Grahams were in bed, and late at night, little Claire comes into their bedroom, 3 years old, wakes her parents up, and she said, fog's rolling in, time to put the horn on. They had never talked about any such thing to her. They had no idea where she picked that up, except maybe from the old sea captain. No idea where she would have gotten that. By the way, this is a beautiful 19th century lens here, 4th order Fresnel lens that's still in use at that lighthouse. Debbie emailed me about 10 or so years ago and told me stories about living there, and she said, by the way, you know the place is haunted, right? She told me that story I just told you. And for other reasons, she just felt strongly the place was haunted. About 10 years ago, the Travel Channel made a documentary on Haunted Lighthouses of America, and I got to be in it. Excuse me, I don't know if any of you have seen her. It's been repeated many times. That's not me in this picture, but I was interviewed at a couple of lighthouses, at Owl's Head at another one, and for some shots they had me play the lighthouse ghost. They actually had me put the uniform on. There's a shot in the show where I'm standing at the top of Owl's Head Light looking out to sea from behind with the uniform on, and that's me, the mysterious keeper, looking out to sea. There's a shot at the Prospect Harbor Lighthouse in Maine where you see a shadow going up the stairs, and that's my shadow. So if you ever see it. But this guy is actually this guy is the father-in-law of the Coast Guard officer who was living in the keeper's house at the time. And he told me that he was sleeping in that same mysterious bedroom upstairs one night, and that there was not a storm going on or anything, but for whatever reason his bed started vibrating like mad. And he said nothing else was shaking, there was no wind or anything. But he just laughed. He thought it was really funny. I'm not sure I feel the same way. But anyway, there's just so many stories about this place. And as I said, this is now that Keeper's House is now the headquarters of the American Lighthouse Foundation. My good friend Bob Trapani, the executive director, has his office there, and his wife, the associate director. And he's the ultimate skeptic. I'm waiting to hear if, I don't know if he'll tell me anything if anything happens, but he's extremely skeptical, so he doesn't want to hear about the ghost stories. We'll see what happens. This picture was emailed to me by a guy a few years ago, just before I was going to do a presentation, and he came to the presentation. He lives in Connecticut, Bob D'Amato, and it's hard to see when you look at this picture, but this is taken from the top of the lighthouse. This is a little oil house where they used to store kerosene for the light. There's a flagpole here, and there's just water out here. You're looking out into Penobscot Bay. The interesting part of the picture is right here, and I'm going to show you that part of the picture cropped and zoomed in. Here it is. Yeah, ooh. It's pretty interesting. He swore to me that it's just a regular snapshot with a digital camera, not a long exposure. Nobody was down there. Nobody was anywhere near there when he took the picture. He didn't think it was anything odd until he got home and looked at it more closely. Sure looks like somebody standing there in front of the fence there. Almost looks like a big hat, like a sombrero, but I think that's just a tree. But anyway, I find this to be one of the more interesting possible paranormal pictures I've seen anywhere. So I don't know the explanation. This lighthouse in Maine has one of the most famous lighthouse ghost stories anywhere. Seguin Light. It's at the mouth of the Kennebec River, kind of near Bath and Booth Bay Harbor. And it's 200 feet above the water. It's the highest light in Maine. It's a very high island. And it's got a beautiful 9-foot-tall first-order Fresnel lens, valued at $8 million, by the way. The only first-order lens in northern New England still in use, which means it's the biggest kind of lens that they make. Very powerful light. There's a very famous lighthouse, and also has a very famous ghost story. And I'll show you what the island looks like from a distance here. Champlain, the French explorer, called it the tortoise. I forget what that is in French, but he said it looked like a tortoise, which it kind of does. And I'll tell you the ghost story. This is another case, sort of, let me show you an old postcard of it. This is sort of like the New London Ledge Light story, where it's a famous legend, but I can't guarantee that it's a true story. Basically, they say, and they say is an important qualification here, that in the mid-1800s, a keeper went to live there, and nobody seems to know his name, but lived with his wife, and this is a common theme in some of these stories. His wife became very bored, which is, again, very easy to believe. So after a few months there, she was so bored, she said she wanted something to pass the time. She asked for a piano. So the keeper bought his wife a piano. They say it was delivered on a schooner, and a crew brought it up the trail, the path to the high keeper's house there, and put it in the house. And along with the piano, the woman was given one piece of sheet music. And it was some popular song of the day. And she learned how to play that one song, but it's all she knew how to play. It's the only piece of music that she had. So she would play that one song over and over and over and over and over and over again until it drove her husband insane, they say. And the story goes that her husband grabbed an axe after chopping wood, proceeded to chop the piano into kindling wood, and proceeded to murder his wife and kill himself. So they say. Again, I'm not saying it's a true story, but this is a very commonly told story. Once again, there's no record of any of this happening. You would think that somebody could produce some sort of newspaper clipping or something pointing to a murder-suicide on the island. There's no record of it ever happening. I will tell you that some local people say that it really happened, but it happened on another island near there. So it may have some kernel of truth. It may be based on a true story. I can't say for sure. But they say that ever since then, if you are on Seguin Island on a quiet day, you listen really carefully, or even if you're passing by in a boat, on a nice quiet day, you will hear this soft piano music, that same song playing over and over and over again in the breeze. I've never heard it, and I've been on the island a few times, but a few years ago, I was on a boat with the Coast Guard and a woman from the GSA, General Services Administration in Boston. We were inspecting some lighthouses under that giveaway program. And she told me that a week before she had been on Seguin Island. She had never heard the ghost story, knew nothing about the piano or any of that. She was walking around by herself,